अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन, सिंध टीवी न्यूज़ जो प्रोग्राम जायज़ो सां गॾु मां आहियां मुंहिंजो मेज़बान फयाज़ नाज। नाज़रीन, अॼोके प्रोग्राम में असां सां गॾु मौजूद आहिनि अमरीकी दानिश्वर, अमरीकी फॉरेन पॉलिसी जा माहिर, अमरीका जी यूनिवर्सिटी जा उस्ताद ऐं अमरीका जी मशहूर थिंक टैंक काउंसिल ऑन फॉरेन रिलेशंस जा अॻूणा पंहिंजो फेलो प्रोफेसर वॉल्टर रसल मीड साहब। जो उन सां गुफ़्तगू कयूं था अमरीकी फॉरेन पॉलिसी ते। Welcome, Mr. Mead here in Pakistan, and I, on behalf of Sin TV and on the behalf of my viewers, welcome you in Pakistan. Anyway, how is your visit in Pakistan?
Well, first, I'm eating much too much Pakistani food. When I get home, I'm going to have to try to lose weight because it's so good. I eat too much.
I see.
Also, I've been so lucky because I've had a chance to meet so many different Pakistanis from so many different political parties, points of view. So I feel I've been getting an education here in Pakistan.
So U.S. foreign policy is the subject which we are going to discuss today in our interview. What is the role of theory of clash of civilization in U.S. foreign policy?
I would say the main thing that when American policymakers think about this idea of the clash of civilization, they are spending all their time thinking, how can we avoid one? In general, Americans don't believe that there must be a clash of civilizations or that there will be one, but we recognize that there are bad feelings, and that there needs to be what I've written about in one of my books, the diplomacy of civilizations, that thinks about how do you try to understand the other person's point of view, how do you try to think, okay, we may have different cultures or civilizations, but we only have one world, and so we have to figure out some way where we can live together in a satisfactory way.
But as we see, Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, these all phenomena are the evidence that there is a lot of role of theory of clash of civilization in U.S. foreign policy.
Well, again, I think there's a very specific concern about one type of thinking that you find, these kinds of crazy fanatical types who believe that they have a version of religion that allows them to kill anyone they want to kill. And so the U.S. is definitely engaged in some kind of a struggle with these people. Our feeling is they started it. They attacked us, these Osama bin Laden, people like that.
And if you remember President Bush's first words, this is a crusade.
But first of all, one thing I find is that in the Islamic world, people use the word jihad, and they mean we're going to have a struggle to make ourselves better. Every time you say jihad, you don't mean a war. In fact, the word crusade is exactly the same as the word jihad.
True.
So, first, he shouldn't have said it. It was a slip of the tongue. But the U.S. we don't really believe in wars of religion.
But there is a little difference, because no one in the Islamic world, no one at the stature of a president level never have used these kind of words. Not in Pakistan, not in Saudi Arabia, but the U.S. president had used these words.
Actually,
this is difference.
Right. No. The Ottoman Sultan, who was the caliph of Islam in those days, declared a holy war against the British in 1914. So it is something that others have done.
No, we are talking about the current situation,
right.
Not
but again,
the historic context.
Bush used it once by accident, didn't mean the way it sounded. No one in the U.S. ever used it again. You never hear it. And Bush has apologized for that. So to say that somehow one word spoken 10 years ago defines American foreign policy, how could this be? If this is the way they were thinking, they'd be talking about it all the time. They're not.
But people here in Pakistan and in the other Islamic countries think that Afghanistan, then Iraq, then Iran. This is not the world. This is the impact of that world we have seen in the later 10 years.
But again, you know, if the U.S. were having some sort of war with Islam, why would Pakistan be the country in the whole world that had the most students coming to the U.S. under free scholarships in our Fulbright program? Why are Pakistani immigrants in the U.S. living freely, making money? Some of them are extremely successful business people. My neighborhood in Jackson Heights, we have Muslims, we have Hindus, we have Christians, we have everybody in my neighborhood, and people live perfectly peacefully. After September 11th, I went into, we have Afghan restaurants in my neighborhood, and I went in to see how they were doing, and, you know, said, have you had threats? Have you had trouble? And they said, no. In fact, all the neighbors are like you. They keep coming in to see if we are okay.
That's good. That's good. Do you see any kind of difference between the foreign policy of Mr. Bush and Mr. Obama?
Yes, I think there are some differences. I think President Bush, especially in his first term, had I think some things that believed some things that turned out not to be true. And one of them was that if the U.S. went into Iraq, there would be a blooming of democracy in Iraq. By his second term, it was clear that while there is some democratic progress in Iraq, you can hardly call it blooming. And so there's much more sense of sobriety and realism and an understanding that the U.S. can't just, you know, point here and have this happen. And President Obama, I think, is trying to make foreign policy for that kind of world. He's someone who, you know, as you know, spent some of his younger time in an Islamic country, in Indonesia. He's somebody who, I think, instinctively understands the unity of the world. His father is from Kenya, who grew up under British colonialism. So Obama has experiences of the world that are very different from Bush's growing up in a very elite American family in Texas. So I think the president brings some of these ideas into foreign policy. I mean, it's easy to have a brilliant idea in foreign policy. Of course, it's not so easy to implement it. But I think President Obama really is trying to reposition the United States in the world.
Do you really think that country like US, its foreign policy can be changed or repositioned by a single person?
Well, first of all, it's not just a single person, because 53% of the Americans voted for Obama. So he's not just trying alone. But
he's a single person who has the Indonesian background.
Right, but again,
in that sense, he's a single person.
He is a single person, but you have to say there are many other people in the U.S. who have similar ideas. And I think President Obama's biggest problem really is that when he came to this job, he didn't have a lot of experience. No one can be, you don't get experience being president until you're president. But he was only the state senator in one state, which is not an important job, like a provincial assembly in Pakistan. Then he had only a short time in the U.S. Senate. Half the time he was running for president. He wasn't even in the Senate. So suddenly he becomes president of the United States. He has ideas, he has visions, he has hopes. But now everything in the world is crashing in on him, and he's having to learn, you know, how do you use the State Department for negotiations? What kind of economic aid works? What kind doesn't work? And how do you trust, how do you tell which foreign leader you can trust and which one you can't? So President Obama is having to learn all of these things. I think today he is a much stronger leader than he was the day he took office. He has much more experience.
But today he has lost the popularity vote.
He's not as strong in the polls. This, I think, is almost entirely about the U.S. economy, not about the foreign policy. And what we think is going to happen, at least what I think is going to happen, is probably the Republicans will gain a lot of seats this fall in the election. But, you know, this happened to Clinton also. when he was elected in his first midterm election, the Republicans gained many seats, but Clinton went on to be reelected and to be very popular. And I think the chances are, my guess is they're better than even that something similar will happen to President Obama.
But if I say that though the major part of his losing polls is its economic problems in the country and overall in the world, but there is a little bit contribution of his foreign policy also. When he was talking in Cairo, his legendary speech, and he was talking to the Muslim world, and then he visited Israel and his stance on the settlements. But with the passage of time, he has to retreat.
Yes, I think he actually, that was an example for me of inexperience. That the president didn't understand, I think, that the U.S. cannot push Israel, or in fact any country, too far. I sometimes use the example, the little island of Cyprus with the Greek and Turkish Cypriots. Mm-hmm. You had the U.S., the EU, the UN, Greece, and Turkey all saying this should be the solution. Mm-hmm. And the Greek Cypriots didn't like it. 800,000 people. And they voted no. They went like this, the whole international community. Mm-hmm. Israel is more powerful than Cyprus. And so when you were working, even when you were a superpower and you were working with a small state that is very, very focused on only one or two issues, you can't control it. A good example in Pakistan. If the U.S. didn't want Pakistan to have the nuclear program, the AQ Khan thing, we couldn't stop it. So I think what the president didn't understand at the beginning was exactly where his power was with Netanyahu and how to use it. I think he understands it better. But also something that I think that maybe people in Pakistan haven't seen as much is that this president has been working harder, I think, than any American president, not just to talk about a Palestinian state, but to build a Palestinian state. Since at the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, the U.S. has helped them build really effective security forces. U.S. generals are involved in the training, and for the first time, the Palestinians, who've always been kind of a national movement but not a state, are actually having a state with security forces, with economic governance that works. The Palestinian economy is growing at 8% a year. And I think what President Obama is hoping, and I share his hope on this very strongly, is that as the Israelis see that the Palestinian Authority has the power in its own territory to enforce the law so that you don't have militias and shootings and things like this, the Israelis will understand that it's in their interest to make an agreement with the Palestinians. Before this happened, the Israelis felt they sign a piece of paper with some Palestinians. Fine, the Israelis get out of all the settlements, but those Palestinians will not be able to stop the militias and other groups that want to continue to attack Israel.
But there is a strong feeling in the Muslim world. People say that in America there is a strong lobby of Israeli supporters that is called neocons or whatever we call it. They will not allow any president to act freely on the Israel-Arab conflict.
Well, I don't think it's the Jews, honestly. I'm actually writing a book on this.
Okay.
Because I think that impression is widespread, that the Jews control American foreign policy.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you look at American public polls, about 63% of the American population says it would like our foreign policy to side with Israel. 63%. Less than 2% of the Americans are Jewish. And so they can't be the whole 63%. Only about 20% of the Americans are conservative Christians. So so that gets you to 23, 24%. Who makes it 63%? That's what I think we need to study.
So I have to go for a short break, but after break I would like to ask that why in the Muslim world there is a perception, especially on the Palestinian question, people are very much angry about the US foreign policy. Do you think that US has flaws in its foreign policy, or this is a misperception? I would like to talk on that after the break.
Okay.
नाज़रीन गुफ्तगू जो सिलसिलो जारी रहंदो वठंदा वक्फो ऐं वापसि अची हिन प्रोग्राम खे अॻिते वधायूं था असां सां गॾु रहिजो. वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन. अचो प्रोग्राम जे सिलसिले खे अॻिते वधायूं. अमरीकी दानिश्वर फॉरेन पॉलिसी एक्सपर्ट वॉल्टर रसल मीड साहब असां सां गॾु आहिनि. उन सां गुफ्तगू कयूं था अमरीका जी जेका दुनिया जे बारे में फॉरेन पॉलिसी आहे उन ते अचो त गुफ्तगू खे अॻिते वधायूं. So, Mr. Mead, we were talking about the Middle East and Arab-Israel conflict. People in the Islamic world think that the common people, I'm not talking about the presidents and the prime minister or the rulers, I'm talking about, they have a kind of hatred against US. They think that Israelis are being supported by the US and they are being imposed on the Islamic world. Do you think that this is a flaw? There is any flaw in the U.S. foreign policy, or you think this?
I think there are, of course, there are flaws in our foreign policy, but I think also the perception is a little bit not accurate. Let me give you some. People think that ever since the beginning, the U.S. has been pushing Israel. But let's look at some history. 1948, the first war of Israeli independence. The country that gave them the arms wasn't the U.S., it was the Soviet Union through Czechoslovakia. 1956, the British and the French sided with the Israelis, the Americans sided with the Egyptians. 1967, the weapons that the Israelis used were actually French weapons. The Mirage jets were French, not American. More than that, the United States did not want Israel to get the nuclear bomb. That was done by the French against the United States. So, and yet my guess would be if you talk to a lot of ordinary people, they would think in every case, United States, US, US, US. Mm-hmm. So I think the US needs to do more, but I also think sometimes the issue gets presented in a very simple way. Also, I've been to Gaza, I've been to the West Bank many times, and talked to many people there in the camps. I've talked to very senior Palestinian officials and so on. And I really do think I have, and I think many Americans share my view, a real concern for the future of the Palestinians. But I also notice that there's a kind of, I don't know, I hate to use the word, but double standard in some of the coverage, because probably some of the Palestinians who have the worst life is in Lebanon, where the Lebanese are keeping the Palestinians in camps. It's as if in 1947 in Pakistan and India, all the refugees were forced into camps and were not allowed to go out and have a life. This is really the people in Gaza, the people in Lebanon, are forced to stay refugees 60 years later. The Lebanese will not let them attend normal college in a normal way. There are many professions they're not allowed to practice. And furthermore, even if they have the money and they want to buy a home outside the camp, it's not legal for them. But you will never hear any of this. The people who are doing it are Arabs and Muslims who are doing it to Palestinians. You never hear this, but it's true. And in the same way, maybe you hear a little bit more about this, but when people talk about the fence around Gaza and the blockade around Gaza, only one little piece of that fence is in Israel. Most of Gaza is with Egypt. So
I think the way you have defended U.S., rather escaped the flaws of the U.S. policy, that is, this response is much more a diplomatic response as compared to as an intellectual response.
No, I think I think everything I just said is true, okay? And everything I just said is things that many people who criticize the United States all the time do not know. So my key point here is that many people around the world criticize American foreign policy without knowing the full facts. That's all.
But being a world power, it was the responsibility of U.S. to respond to these sentiments positively, to cool down these sentiments.
Look, the answer, I think, is actually the U.S. First of all, I don't think we can really be all that responsible for sentiments. We have to worry much more about the situation. And in the sense of the Arab-Israeli situation, first of all, no country has given more money to the Palestinians than the U.S. in terms of supporting them and keeping their living standards. No country has put more diplomatic energy into solving the problem. We have now gotten, I think, even Netanyahu admits, he doesn't like to admit it, but he admits that there must be a two-state solution. And Sharon has admitted, before Sharon left the scene, Sharon also admitted it. This means that in Israel, even the very hardline thinkers now understand that Israel cannot try to hold all of this land. We also have gotten, twice, we've gotten Israel to agree to give up more than 95% of the land, closing down settlements, leaving settlements as part of an agreement. Unfortunately, we're not able to get the Palestinians to agree at the same time. But if you want to understand American policy toward Israel, it is not to let them keep building settlements and have more settlements. We've twice gotten them to admit that they would give up the settlements only to be rejected by the Palestinians.
Okay, we are moving forward. What do you think, what is the solution of Iran issue? And you have written, if I am not wrong, that you have written that Mr. Obama can lead a war against Iran.
I think it's not impossible. But I want to say that I believe that his goal is strongly not to have a war with Iran. And I think that's the United States does not want war with Iran. I think it's interesting to me, I think if the Iranian people were able to control the policy of the Iranian government, it would actually be a much more pro-U.S. policy than the government has. Because it's clear that the protesters and many of these other groups, they're Iranian nationalists and they're Muslims, but they believe that a good relationship with the United States is the best path for Iran. So,
but on the terms and conditions of U.S. or?
Well, what I'm saying is, though, that the policy of the small group of clerics, Shia clerics around Ahmadinejad, and Ahmadinejad himself, is deeply unpopular in Iran. And what we are hoping in the United States, hoping very much, is that the will of the people in Iran can be heard. And that if that happens, then we think that, in fact, there will not be any kind of a confrontation between the U.S. and Iran, but instead will actually build a new and much more positive relationship.
Don't you think that these kind of analysis there was for Mr. Saddam Hussein, that he is very much unpopular, and when the U.S. will go, Mr. Bush developed this argument that whenever armies will go into the Iraq, the people will welcome those armies. But
well, I didn't say I thought the people would welcome the armies in Iran or anywhere else, but I do think, what I'm saying is that when you ask what does the U.S. want, all right, it wants to reach an agreement with Iran that preserves the important interests of both countries.
What do you see the impact of war against Iran? If U.S. engages in the war with Iran, what will be its impact on this global?
It's hard to predict that in advance because you can always make generalizations about war, but what will be, if there were to be a war, for example, would it happen because Iran had attacked U.S. forces in the Gulf? Would it happen because the Israelis attacked her? What are the causes of the war? And also, how long is it? Does it mean that two guns are firing at each other from a ship to the shore? Does it mean that 100,000 troops are in the country? So what I'm saying is, there's so many possible scenarios. It's hard to make any prediction. But what I do know, and I've talked to a lot of the people in the U.S. who are involved in the planning, is that nobody wants war.
Don't you think that if US engages in war against Iran, the sentiments in the Muslim world, anti-American sentiments will rise rapidly.
In some places, but I should point out that probably the group of people who are trying the hardest to get the U.S. to attack Iran are the Gulf Arabs. You know, in fact, who many of them consider the Shia Iranians to be, but I'm including the clergy too, you know, not only the kings. What I'm saying is that the fear of Iran among the Arabs, I mean, there have been newspaper stories that the Saudi Arabians are offering the Israelis to use their airspace for an attack on Iran. So it's not so simple that all the Muslims are in one corner saying peace, 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 and everyone else is in another corner saying war, war, war. Let me tell you, it's a very strange experience, but I've had it, to be in another country and have all these people saying to me, you need to attack them now. Why haven't you attacked them already? They're all Muslims, these people.
I think before going to another break, I would like to ask one question, and after break we will talk about this region war against terrorism and Pakistan and South Asia. But I would like to ask one question, that is about China. You have written that this is the next red menace.
No, I haven't really said it's a menace. I'm actually saying that Americans these days think we're not going to have to fight with China or have some kind of Cold War with China. We actually think that U.S.-Chinese relations are likely to go in a very favorable direction for both countries. That China is realizing, and it's partly because India is becoming a bigger power, but China is realizing that it can't really conquer Asia. You know, it can't become the #1 country in Asia the way the Soviet Union tried to be in Europe or Japan tried. And if China understands that, then I think the U.S. and China will not have a war in 1,000 years. So I'm actually very optimistic about the future of U.S.-Chinese relations. Maybe I only feel this way because the Chinese are using one of my books as a textbook for teaching American foreign policy.
Really?
Yes.
So you are giving them the favor.
So I feel that at least the Chinese and I understand each other very well. I don't know about the rest.
Okay. So do you really think that China will behave like that? He will accept this position?
What does I say?
Because so many people think that China is the emerging world power.
Right. Many people think, well, look, China is going to be a big power in the 21st century. There is no doubting that. It's a big power already. But what kind of a power, and what will its ambitions be? For example, some people talk about China building a blue water navy to challenge the U.S. You know, maybe they'll try. Who knows? I don't have a crystal ball. But here's the thing: if China builds,
but this is true that he is.
They're building some ships, but you see, here's what happens. If China builds a ship, the U.S. doesn't have to build a ship for every ship China builds, because Japan will build a ship, India will build a ship, Australia will build a ship. You see what I'm saying? So that for China, the idea is, shall we build 1,000 ships and these other countries build 300 each, and so we're still equal, but we've spent all that money? Or do we maybe make an agreement that's cheaper, where we have the same balance?
So you think that as there was U.S. foreign policy for Soviet Union, there was NATO, there was CETO, CENTO, and simultaneously China has also
well, I'm saying we're not. What I'm saying is we're not going to have to do that. We're not going to have to do CENTO, CEATO, and so on, because I think the way that Asia is growing, with many different powers. You know, you have India growing, but you have Japan is not going away. You have Vietnam is growing. Indonesia is doing well. Malaysia is doing well. Australia, you have all these countries that are growing. And so that means that China is not the whole story. It's only part of the story.
So, Mr. Mead, we are going to a break. After break, I would like to talk about the U.S.-Indian relationship, because when we talk about China, India has a very important role in that context. We will talk about that, and after that we will talk about Pakistan and Pak-America relationship, and then war on terrorism and Afghanistan after the break.
You have a long list.
So नाज़रीन गुफ्तगू जो सिलसिलो जारी रहंदो वठूं त वक़्त वापस जी प्रोग्राम खे अॻिते वधायूं था असां सां गॾु रहिजो। वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन, अचो प्रोग्राम जे सिलसिले खे अॻिते वधायूं। अमरीकी दानिश्वर फॉरेन पॉलिसी एक्सपर्ट वॉल्टर रसल मीड साहब असां सां गॾु आहिनि। उन सां गुफ्तगू कयूं था अमरीका जी जेका दुनिया जे बारे में फॉरेन पॉलिसी आहे उन ते अचो तुम गुफ्तगू खे अॻिते वधायूं। So, Mr. Mead, we were talking about the China, and when we talk about U.S.-China relationship, we will have to talk about the U.S.-Indian relationship because India is being blessed with the U.S. nuclear deal. Do you think this is a initiative to block China or to rise another power against China? Do you think this is a strategic? Or?
Well, I do think that the U.S. and Pakistan probably look at the rise of India different ways. Because the U.S. thinks about, when the U.S. thinks about India, it thinks about China, Japan, Vietnam, Myanmar, many things, and it thinks that a rising India is one of the reasons that China will not try to control Asia. But on the specific nuclear deal, I think there is some misunderstanding because when I talk to people in the U.S., they say the U.S. is actually willing to make a nuclear agreement with Pakistan. And that the block is that when the Pakistanis were developing their program, they engaged, I don't know what countries, Iran, North Korea, I didn't read all the details or whatever. And they don't want to punish Pakistan for this, but they would like Pakistan to help them understand exactly what happened so that the U.S. can use that information as it tries to fight proliferation.
All responsible U.S. officials say that Pakistan's nuclear program is in a safer position.
Right. But that, you see, but we have this problem of trust and proliferation. You know, the deals with Iran, North Korea, transfers of technology, I don't know. I don't read all the secret cables, so I don't know. But that's what I'm hearing from U.S. officials, and because there's that lack of trust about what Pakistan did, and who knows, because we don't know, might still be doing in terms of secret cooperation with other states, the U.S. does not feel the level of trust in the Pakistani program, even though you're correct, the U.S. feels the Pakistani government is in full control of its nukes. But so this is something, frankly, if the Pakistanis told Washington what it wanted to know, we could start working out the arrangement very quickly. So from the U.S. perspective, we think this is a Pakistani choice, not an American choice.
This will be interesting for my viewers that this is a Pakistani choice, though Pakistani officials have so many times requested for some similar kind of deal.
Right, but what I'm telling you is this is what the U.S. wants the next step to be. Okay, if you want to deal with us, then explain to us all the proliferation activities of the past, and then we'll talk about the deal.
Okay, well, I would like to request you to analyze the U.S. foreign policy in the South Asia when there is India and there is a Pakistan, and they have a rivalry since their birth.
Yeah.
So how will U.S. balance these two allies?
It will be difficult. But again, this is exactly the kind of problem that American foreign policy has in many places. Think of Greece and Turkey. For decades, they hated each other as much as anybody in the world hated each other, but they were both in the NATO alliance. And every time the U.S. Congress voted some aid to Greece, all the Turks got really angry, and every time something came to Turkey, all the Greeks got angry. Right now, by the way, the Indians are angry with the U.S. about its military aid to Pakistan, and they've been attacking us for this. So we are used to trying to have good relationships with two countries that don't always have a good relationship with each other. But I should say something because I think many Pakistanis just, have a fear that the U.S. is just going to keep promoting India without any thought for Pakistan or how this would work out.
Yeah.
I think that's a legitimate fear. What I understand is that the Americans don't think it would be good for India we don't want to see India push Pakistan around, or for Pakistan to kind of lose its sovereignty and its independence and its self-respect. Because the kind of aid, the U.S. is hoping that as India, China, Japan, all these other countries become powerful, a new Asia will take shape that in our dreams, and maybe it's only our dreams, will look like more and more like the European Union, rich and peaceful. But to do that, countries have to accept limits on their power. We want India to treat Pakistan with dignity and restraint. That's what we would like to see, and we don't think that promoting the weakness of Pakistan and the strength of India is the way to do that. The U.S. wants Pakistan to benefit.
But people in Pakistan think that America is a not reliable ally.
Well,
if you remember,
yes.
if you remember, Mr. Ayub Khan, the ex-president, former president of Pakistan, he wrote his book "Friends Not Masters." And when there was 71 war, people and government was expecting that U.S. as an ally will help Pakistan to save the Pakistan, but unfortunately they didn't help.
The Americans think, though, that many times they've made clear, as I make clear, for example, that the U.S. interest in Pakistan, we don't have a carte blanche, as we say, a complete check. People say, why isn't America going to fix Kashmir? And I say, with all due respect, we don't think we can, and that's not really something that we will do. The U.S., I think the Pakistanis have had unrealistic expectations at different moments. The U.S. never intended to only protect Pakistan no matter what happened. And that doesn't mean that we want India to take over here, but there have been limits on the U.S. commitment.
People in Pakistan also think that U.S. foreign policy has always supported military dictators in Pakistan instead of supporting the democratic forces in Pakistan.
Right.
From Ayub to Zia to Musharraf, these all were supported by the U.S. governments.
Yeah, I think what people in the U.S. would say there is, first of all, they understand that in fact U.S. As a matter of historical record, that's when the U.S. aid to Pakistan was high. But what they say is it wasn't because Pakistan had a dictatorship, it was because those dictators happened to be in power at times when the U.S. had important, urgent interests. In fact, the aid went to them not because they were dictators, but in spite of being dictators. That the U.S. would really like nothing more than to see Pakistan develop in a democratic way. I've actually been very pleased to see, like this time, the media is very lively here in a way that I think is new in Pakistan, that there's much more freedom to speak. But to be candid, and this is, I don't know that the government thinks this way, but certainly as an individual, what I hear all the time is that the problem with Pakistan, the main problem with Pakistani democracy in the past has been the character of the governments and the governance. Talking about corruption, I don't want to mention anything about specific politicians, but going to England in the middle of big floods or whatever it might be, and a sense that there's a lot of corruption in the government. And so it becomes hard for the U.S. to just promote democracy if democracy isn't associated also with good governance.
And I think U.S. people and the government has a lot of experience, and they know that these kind of flaws of democratic governments can be escaped or can be
They can be. but
only with the continuity of the democratic process.
Yes and no. I mean, you know, I guess what I think we sort of, I mean, I'll speak personally. I can't talk about.
If you support the dictators or the military governments, then there is an interruption in the democratic process.
Look, I hate dictators. I'm a journalist. I hate dictators. I hate military governments. If we had them in America, I'd probably be in jail.
Policy, not about you.
No, but what I'm trying to say here, though, is that you know, I think many Americans look at Pakistan, and here's what they see. They see the military is locked into a national strategy of confrontation with India, spending a lot of money that the country really doesn't have on this confrontation. And we see that the military then, you know, because of this, there's not enough education, there's not enough infrastructure development and all of these other things. But we also see in the civilian world, some people call them, I guess, the feudal landlords or whatever, but certain civilian power structures that also block different kinds of change. And we haven't yet seen, you know, I'm not talking governmentally, I'm talking as a sort of, you know, individual, a democracy movement that seems to be able to challenge a lot of the red lines in Pakistan that between them have prevented the country from succeeding.
The time is very short, and I have to ask a last question. In the world, there are so many people who believe that U.S. is a declining power, so a world power. There is a discussion in the world that post-American world. What do you see? Is it true?
Personally, I don't think so. I think people in the 1990s got very, oh, America's a unipolar power, superpower, and got too excited. And then they get then they go, oh, America's in decline. I think, you know, people need to, we might say, take their medicine and calm down.
I see.
And that, in fact, I think America, let's just compare America with Britain. Okay. When Britain was at the peak of its global power, 1860s, 1870s, Britain had about 7% of the global GDP. Today, the U.S. has about 18 to 20%, depending on how it's measured. If you look out to 2050, and I'm not looking at American projections, but like the European Union or some others, you see that America will still have 15, 16% maybe of world GDP. So that up through 2050, the U.S. is going to have more than double the economic position that Britain had in its best days. Now, that does not mean that the U.S., I think, is going to be able to control everything in the world, nor should we try. But I do think it means that America is going to have a sort of a unique place in the world, you know, certainly through my working life and maybe even through yours. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Professor Russel Mead साहब. नाज़रीन, अमरीकी दानिश्वर प्रोफेसर वॉल्टर रसल मीड सां अमरीकी फॉरेन पॉलिसी जे हवाले सां तव्हां असांजी गुफ़्तगू ॿुधी. तोड़े जो टाइम तमामु घटि हो. असांजी ख़्वाहिश हुई त अफ़गानिस्तान ते ऐं पाकिस्तान जे हवाले सां वधीक गुफ़्तगू थिए. उहो टाइम जी घटिताई जे करे न थी सघियो. पंहिंजे मेज़बान फयाज़ नाज़ खे ॾींदा इजाज़त. अल्लाह ने